The Baltimore Ravens were pretty well represented in the NFL's top 100 for the 2012 season. If you assume distribution amongst all teams to be equal, you'd figure everyone would end up with about 3. While the Ravens had 4 in the top 20 alone, all on the defensive side of the ball. That core 4 of Ngata, Suggs, Reed, and Lewis slotted in at numbers 9, 11, 16, and 20 respectively. Ray Rice, having just led the league in yards from scrimmage, followed just after those 4 at number 22. And while fullback Vonta Leach was used to going ahead of Rice on game day, in this case he trailed by about 20, being named number 45 as one of just 2 fullbacks. And then there's the 7th Raven named on this list. At number 74, behind 10 other quarterbacks, Joe Flacco made his first ever NFL 100 list. But number 74, really? 24 spots below Peyton Manning after a season-long absence due to neck surgery? 33 spots behind Matt Stafford with his 13-16 career record and 0-1 playoff records at that point? 44 spots behind Ben Roethlisberger after beating his Steelers for the division a year ago? 70 spots behind Brady after he just outdueled him for 4 quarters on the road in January? Entering this season, here's the list of quarterbacks to have won 40 or more games in the first 4 seasons of their career. Dan Marino with 41, our old pal Matt Ryan in Atlanta with 43, and at the top of the list, Joe Flacco with 44 fucking wins in his first 4 seasons. Furthermore, while Matty Ice had admittedly managed to take the Falcons to the playoffs in 3 of his 4 seasons at the helm, he was 0-3 and had yet to eclipse 200 passing yards in a single postseason game. Meanwhile, here's the list of quarterbacks with the playoff win in each of their first 4 seasons. Joe Flacco. End of list.
Ryan might have the gaudier passing numbers. 2011 did mark his first 4,000-yard season. But if that wasn't enough for him to make the NFL 100 list, then you would think that the ability to win is one of the deciding criteria. So why is the quarterback with the second most wins in the NFL over the past 4 years ranked 74th on this list? This was a frequent question on the minds of everyone in Baltimore. The public perception of Joe outside of the city at this point was that he was a fraud, a fluke, a huckster. Skip Bayless led a chorus of pundit voices on networks like ESPN that proclaimed Joe Fluco to be hoodwinking the national viewing audience. Rather than shaking the faith of the Ravens' flock, these attacks only seemed to strengthen their belief in January Joe. They knew this team was good enough to at least get back to the playoffs, and they knew, even if the rest of the world didn't want to admit it, that they had a guy who could lead them through that postseason gauntlet, that had the cool demeanor and the clutch necessary to put them through if only a couple other things could break their way. Good thing there's always next year.
This year, we did what we were supposed to do. We fought as a team. We fought as a team. There will be one Super Bowl champ crown at the end of this year. That's it. So the way we feel, somebody gonna feel like that tomorrow, and somebody gonna feel like that in a week. That's a fact. And the fact is, we got to come back and go to work to make sure we finish it next time. That's all we got to do. Remember that, man. God has never made a mistake. But we done came too far to drop our head. Joe, you played your ass off. You hear me, man? I'm telling you, man. Don't ever drop your head when it comes to a loss, dog. This right here makes us stronger. Let's understand who we are as a team. We got an opportunity to keep going, man. Let's be stronger as a team, man. Let's be who we are. Ravens on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Now, just because members of the Ravens and fans of the Ravens found some measure of peace in that loss doesn't mean it didn't sting. Brady giving everyone a second nickel for times that he lost to Peyton Manning's goofy younger brother softened the blow a little bit. But on the other hand, how could Baltimore watch that and not think about how their own chances against that team would have looked? And while continuity had, to this point in the Harbaugh-Flacco era, been a boon to the team's consistent success, certain bills were starting to come due, and certain clocks were starting to run out.
While rookie-scale contracts signed in Flacco's draft year of 2008 were not as much of a steal as they were even now entering 2012, the end of a first-round quarterback's rookie contract presented a kind of ultimatum. Any financial investment beyond this point would begin to incur opportunity costs in the form of other players that they simply wouldn't be able to also pay. Some kind of extension seemed the best way forward if the team wanted to maintain flexibility while still also properly compensating the player. But if the football world can't agree on the value of a player in the first place, then finding a starting point for negotiations was always going to be a challenge. Entering the fifth and final year of Joe's rookie deal, it was time for decisions to be made. In April that offseason, Flack was ready to share some thoughts on those decisions, at this point saying that he certainly wanted to get a long-term deal done before the beginning of the season to get it off his mind. Something that he swore wasn't on his mind during all this was the other quarterbacks in the league. Joe insisted that he wasn't looking at anyone else's paychecks, that this wasn't about the money, but instead about what he felt he deserved. Still, his place in the quarterback standings ultimately would determine what the market felt he deserved, and in the April radio interview in which he shared these thoughts, he had something to say about his place in the league as well.
So, your agent, Joe Linta, says, if winning matters, Joe Flacco is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. So I say to you, Joe Flacco, is Joe Flacco one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL?
Without a doubt. What do you expect me to say?
Before the season, everybody was killing Eli Manning about saying he was one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL.
That worked out.
How'd that work out?
Right. Yeah, you know, what is every quarterback in the NFL? I mean, I assume everybody thinks they're a top 5 quarterback. I mean, I think I'm the best. I don't think I'm the top 5. I mean, I think I'm the best. I mean, I don't think I'd be very successful in my job if I didn't feel
I knew you were going to say that.
The New York Times wrote that Flacco was almost universally mocked for making these comments on Baltimore's WNST radio station. But despite having ample opportunities to walk it back, as reporters pressed him on the question in the following weeks, Joe stuck to his guns. And in an almost imitation of their quarterback, Baltimore and the Ravens flock stood behind him as rival fan bases guffawed at the thought that Joe Flacco, of all people, was the best quarterback in the league. In the end, the statement the Ravens made with their reported offer to Joe in July compromised somewhere in the middle. Looking at the top 10 quarterback salaries by average annual value entering the season, Sam Bradford brought up the rear with $13 million as the last beneficiary of the old rookie scale contracts before the 2011 change. Then he moved up through Mark Sanchez, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, and Matt Schaub before reaching the top 5. 2010's Comeback Player of the Year Michael Vick and 2011 Super Bowl MVP Eli Manning both sat right around $16 million. Brady and Manning got about $18 and $19 million respectively. And taking the top spot for the season was the newly extended Drew Brees, with the first ever contract to average $20 million per season.
The Ravens brass actually made 2 long-term offers to offensive stars this month, and 1 contract was signed. On July 16th, Rice signed a 5-year extension worth roughly $40 million, setting him up in the top tier of running backs for the league salary-wise to match with his production to that point. Joe was glad for Ray, saying the signing was a, quote, big thing for the organization. However, when he and agent Joe Linta received the reported offer of a 5-year, $90 million deal worth about $18 million per year, the pair declined. 3 months later, his commitment to getting a deal done before the season seems to be less of a priority, with him now saying he won't let it distract him. He's got enough distractions at home after all, now that Stephen Flacco is living there. That's his firstborn son, Stephen, for the record, not his dad. But eventually it comes time to leave home for training camp once again. And when he left for Owings Mills, he did so without having any kind of long-term deal in place. Joe was going to go out there and try to play his way into a deal worth well more than $18 million. If he wants to get paid like an elite quarterback next offseason, he'll need to end any kind of debate over whether or not he can play like one. While the Ravens brass concerned themselves with retaining this offensive talent, there were, of course, some requisite departures from the prior season. The defense continued to produce coveted free agents for the league as a whole to gobble up, with San Diego poaching yet another star linebacker that the Ravens had employed in the past few years, Jarrett Johnson. In a city that values its Ironmen, Johnson had notably played a franchise record 129 consecutive games to that point, but would now be suiting up in Chargers blue. The defense suffered a few other losses, particularly with special teams aces Haruki Nakamura and Tom Zbikowski. And on the offensive side of the ball, it wasn't particularly surprising that Lee Evans did not return to the wide receiver room. But apart from a few notable departures, many of the same faces from the last 4 years in 2011 remained in place. Here in Baltimore, continuity reigned in the lead up to the September 10th kickoff of the new season.
And then, on September 6th, right between the end of the 2012 preseason and start of the regular season, Art Modell passed away. Art Modell nationally is a complicated figure. In Baltimore, however, the love for him is maybe as uncomplicated as it is for any sporting figure in the city's history. Once the longtime owner of the Cleveland Browns, Modell became a hero in Charm City and persona non grata in Northeast Ohio when he moved the Browns franchise to Baltimore after the 1995 season. Chalking the decision up to massive losses largely related to the city's crumbling stadium infrastructure, Modell packed up and sought greener pastures and a fresh start. Cleveland would be set to receive a new franchise shortly that would continue the Browns' legacy, and the remnants of the old Cleveland organization now residing in Baltimore would be considered an expansion franchise for all intents and purposes. It's kind of ironic that maybe the only fan base that could properly empathize with Cleveland, a Rust Belt city losing a football team near and dear not just to them but to their municipal identity because of squabbles over stadiums with the owner, was Baltimore, the city that was now reaping the benefits of their anguish. These Cleveland fans, standing in stunned disbelief, would look very similar to the Baltimore fans that in March of 1984 stood outside the Colts facility when the team packed up and left in a bunch of Mayflower trucks. The question of how Ravens fans ultimately grapple with the knowledge that their joy comes at the expense of a pain that they know all too well, it's frankly one that still to this day doesn't have a perfect answer. It's as if Ursula K. Le Guin's Child of Omelas didn't live in some dark, hidden-away basement dungeon while providing some intrinsic force allowing you and your city to enjoy football, but instead forced you to confront the human cost on a twice-annual basis. Many in Baltimore will defensively respond that it's not the same if the city got to keep the team names, the records, the traditions. With the exception of a marching band, the Colts did not leave anything behind. Same for teams like the Dodgers and Giants in baseball or the Lakers in basketball. Modell himself expressed this sentiment at the time of the move, but you and I know that's poor relief for the fan that watches players they used to root for win games for a team that will come to be a hated divisional rival. For this reason, Clevelanders continued to despise him and openly campaigned against his Hall of Fame candidacy for years afterwards, regardless of his accomplishments with Cleveland or with the Ravens as they went on to quickly win the first and only Super Bowl that he'd ever experienced as an owner. The nation by this point had largely seemed to take Cleveland's side. Just 2 years prior to this, despite his stature in the league as one of the foremost owners during the NFL's explosion in popularity and someone who had a big hand in the television side of that, he failed to gain entry into the Hall of Fame. ESPN writer John Clayton offered this potential explanation that seemed to represent the consensus.
A majority of people in the Hall of Fame room, including me, never felt comfortable to vote him in. Canton is just too close to Cleveland. It just didn't feel right.
After his passing, writers would acknowledge the part that Modell played in the broadcast infrastructure that led to the very idea of those territorial television rights as a 31-year chair for the NFL's television committee. Not to mention his role in helping to negotiate the league's first collective bargaining unit. Death, as it often does, providing a bit of thawing of the man's frosty public image, or at least the one that had been superimposed onto him by the scorned Browns faithful. Modell, for his part, threw himself full force into the new town that, regardless of whatever bittersweet feelings they had in the back of their minds, welcomed him and the team with open arms. Regardless of what it took to get it, football was back in Baltimore, and it didn't take long before the city was on top of the game for the first time since Super Bowl V. Admittedly, by the time the team reached Super Bowl 35, Modell had already sold the minority position off to the man who would in 2004 become the new principal owner, Steve Biscotti. But even after divesting all but 1% of the team, Modell retained an office in the building and stayed on as a consultant up to his passing. Modell's presence was celebrated for the renaissance it represented, but it was also a reminder that we in Baltimore were enjoying something that hadn't always been ours. Up until September 2012, no matter how many players and personnel moved on from that original Cleveland squad, Modell remained. He was the last tie to what came before this team. This was the beginning of a Ravens era fully unburdened of any trappings of their previous identity, with one small exception. For the entirety of the season, the team would play with a small black circle on their jerseys with the word Art.
With those jerseys, and with helmet decals to boot for Week 1, the 2012 Ravens took the field for the first time on September 10th for the season's first edition of Monday Night Football. At home in M&T Bank Stadium, they played host to the rival Cincinnati Bengals in front of a raucous home field crowd, and Baltimore got to work quick in the first quarter. Their first drive of the season ended with a 46-yard field goal sailing through the uprights to make it 3-0 early on.
There's one last departure from last season's team. Not only was that dropped pass at the end of the 2011 AFC Championship game the last target of Lee Evans' Ravens career, the shank was the very last kick of Billy Cundiff's Ravens career. That offseason, special team stickler John Harbaugh brought in competition for the incumbent, as he always does. On May 29th, an undrafted free agent from Texas was signed. 3 months later, Billy Cundiff was out of a job, and Justin Tucker was the Baltimore Ravens kicker. Tucker, a Houston native who grew up idolizing Adam Vinatieri, got serious about the profession while at the NFL factory Westlake High in Austin, the same school attended by Drew Brees and Tucker's teammate and Hall of Guy inductee Nick Foles. While in high school, Tucker sought out Vinatieri's former personal kicking coach Doug Blevins to help elevate his game, eventually playing for the Texas Longhorns in college. While there, he had perhaps the best chance in school history to display the same clutch gene that resides in the Flacco family. In his senior year, an upcoming conference realignment meant that the matchup between Texas and their rivals Texas A&M, the 118th such matchup in the past 117 years, would be the final one for the foreseeable future. Number 25 ranked Texas trailed 24-25 when Justin Tucker kicked a potential game-winning field goal as time expired. Once the ball had sailed through the uprights, Tucker was hoisted onto his teammates' shoulders as he yelled like a madman in the wake of a 27-25 win.
This was clearly a man ready for the big stage, and if he wasn't already set for it, he takes the extra semester off due to early graduation to get some extra preparation in. But despite that, despite his coaching pedigree, despite his big game resume, Tucker is not one of the 4 kickers selected in that year's NFL draft. Blair Walsh and Greg Zuerlein will have respectable careers, but Randy Bullock and especially John Potter are absolute busts. And none look as immediately ready for the moment as Tucker does by the time he beats out Cundiff in training camp to make it onto the field here in 2012.
Now comes a brief interruption. In January of 2025, reporting by the Baltimore Banner will bring to light a slate of charges from 6 massage therapists against Justin Tucker related to inappropriate sexual behavior between the years of 2012 and 2016. Violating an individual's bodily autonomy is reprehensible under any circumstances, but to do so in a situation where that individual has been hired in a professional capacity to help you maintain the condition of your own body is beyond the pale. Should these credible claims be found to have merit, this might do nothing to diminish Tucker's statistical case as one of, if not the greatest place kicker in NFL history, but does destroy any affection that we at RTG feel about him. This very real damage that he is alleged to have done to individuals is galling, not just because these individuals deserve respect and dignity just by dint of their humanity, but because largely these were fans of his as well. We all, as sports fans, opt into some kind of pain suffered at the hands of our heroes, but that is a far cry from this kind of galling behavior. To be blunt, fuck Justin Tucker. As a Ravens fan myself, I spent years cheering this man on. I can also guarantee you that, as a Ravens fan, I will not be doing that now or ever again. As storytellers, though, these allegations mean that we are now presented with a dilemma. It would be difficult to remove Tucker from the story entirely, and frankly, it would be disingenuous to pretend that he is not a very important character in this saga. He's going to come up again in this episode and in the episodes to come. For what it's worth, So will discussions of members of the Baltimore Ravens and just general violence against women. Football is a thorny bitch. But while we mention him, we will take every effort to not celebrate or valorize him any further. Sometimes when powerful people that you placed on a pedestal let you down, that is all we can do.
Tucker is back out in the second for an extra point to cap Flacco's first touchdown of the season, a 34-yard score to veteran Anquan Boldin. He'll get a third of those in the third quarter after Flacco throws to his second Mormon tight end, Dennis Pitta, then comes back the next drive to hit his second field goal of the day, this one from 40 yards out. After Ed Reed on the very next drive takes Andy Dalton's errant throw 34 yards for a pick six, setting the career interception return yardage record in the process, Tucker gets to hit his third extra point of the day to make it 10 so far for the rookie.
In the fourth quarter, Ray Rice finds the end zone for his second score of the game, and Tucker boots his fifth point after on the day to well and truly put the game out of reach. But even with an insurmountable lead, the Rook still gets to sprinkle on just a little bit more when he hits his third field goal of the game to make it 44-13. Cam Cameron's offense is humming with Joe under center here in year 5, but it sure is good to know that should a drive stall out, you're going to have a pretty dependable safety valve for 3 points, especially after how last year went. Now, we know now that that is a bit of an understatement. The 14 points Tucker scored in that game are part of a total that is currently the franchise record. And that wasn't a cupcake record, despite the Ravens being such a young franchise. Sure, the closest skill player is Jamal Lewis with 284, who is just 10 behind third place Billy Cundiff with 294. That's typical of an expansion team. But Matt Stover's 1,464 are not typical of any team. And Tucker is already ahead by nearly 200, but we don't know that watching week 1 this season. All we know is Joe looks great, the team looks great, and they are 1-0 to start.
The next week is a notable one for John Harbaugh, as he made his first ever trip to Philadelphia as an opposing head coach after serving previously as the special teams coordinator under 2 regimes. But unfortunately, this Battle of the Birds is a game that reflects more on the officials than it does on either team. The 2012 season began with people serving as officials that can charitably be called replacement refs and less charitably be called scabs. The NFLRA, because the referees have a labor association too, had their members refuse to work during a labor strike against the league. The league, that massive tanker ship of an institution incapable of making any kind of quick pivot, instead decided to stay the course by bringing in replacement refs. To call the results mixed would be to imply that there was anyone happy with this a couple weeks in. But the players sure weren't. The fans sure weren't. And given the scale of the bad press that snowballed as the early weeks of the season went on, it's hard to imagine that Commissioner Roger Goodell and the league were all that happy either. While this Week 2 matchup wasn't the most notable case of blown calls, portions of Baltimore would point to this game as an example of the replacement's inability to, beyond making the correct calls, establish any sense of discipline on the field. Some Ravens fans claim that this matchup in particular allowed for far too much aggressive, outside-the-lines contact by Eagles players like Deshaun Jackson and Kerry Williams. In the end, though, the offense that had scored 44 the week prior only managed 23, with 9 of those coming via Justin Tucker field goals. And what's more, the Ravens defense was perhaps starting to show some signs of attrition, as they were unable to stop a late go-ahead drive by Michael Vick as the Ravens lost 24-23 and fell to 1-1.
Precious little time to dwell on that, though, when the team that eliminated you in the playoffs the year before is coming to town for a Week 3 matchup. The New England Patriots had an identical 1-1 record as they made the trip for Sunday Night Football, the Ravens' second primetime game in 3 weeks. That 1-1 record seemed sure to extend to 2-1 as the Pats jumped out to a 13-0 lead by the end of the first quarter. But Baltimore was not prepared to go quietly into that late September night. After starting the night with a pair of punts, a pick, and yet another punt, Joe and the offense finally get things going on their 5th possession. Ray Rice powers the team forward with his legs for much of the drive, catching a pass from Joe as well, and his new backup, rookie right out of Temple, Bernard Pierce, gets a couple touches too. But in the end, right at the edge of the red zone, Cameron dials up a deep look for Joe in his cannon of an arm, and at the receiving end of a 25-yard arc through the air for the first Ravens touchdown of the night is Torrey Smith. Some of the Ravens flock would have first become aware of Torrey during his college career at nearby University of Maryland College Park. In his first 2 years, he contributed on offense as the second or third receiver, but mostly made his way as a return specialist, racking up a pair of 1,000-yard seasons. After choosing to return for another year to boost his stock, He did just that as his receiving and returning flipped. His 585 return yards were his lowest yet, but he more than made up for it with his first 1,000-yard season as a receiver.
All this led to Baltimore taking him in the second round of the 2011 draft, and after a slow start with 0 receptions through 2 weeks, Smith started off the first quarter of a 2011 Week 3 game against the Rams with 3 receptions of 74, 41, and 18 yards. The first 3 of his career, and all for touchdowns. From that point, the sideline speedster and the big-armed quarterback only improved their chemistry going forward, and Smith went on to set Ravens rookie records in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. What's more, even when Smith doesn't come down with the ball, he's an excellent knack for drawing deep defensive pass interference calls, and that money spent's just as good. He was a non-factor in the win over Houston in the playoffs, but caught 3 passes for 82 yards in the loss to New England that ended Baltimore's year. But that's not the only reason this game is carrying a little extra weight for Smith. The night before this game, he got a call around 1 a.m. The Virginia State Police had just found the wreck of a motorcycle off the side of a highway in northeast Virginia. The motorcycle belonged to Tevin Chris Jones, Torrey's brother, who had struck a utility pole and was pronounced dead at the scene. Jones had been wearing a helmet. There's no evidence of inebriation or intoxication. The family had simply been dealt an unimaginably devastating tragedy.
Smith went off to join his family immediately upon receiving the news, but returned around 4 to the Ravens for warm-ups, eventually deciding along with the coaching staff to play in that evening's game. And now, less than 24 hours since this tragedy, his first reception of the night has the Ravens within 6 points. After forcing a New England punt, Joe gets right back to work with a deep bomb to Jacoby Jones, sandwiched amongst several 5- and 6-yard pickups from Rice, Pierce, and even Flacco himself. After Dennis Pitta catch and run from the 20 finds pay dirt to tie it up, Tucker's extra point is good, and the Ravens lead 14-13 with under 2 minutes to go in the half. Tom Brady then proceeds to do what he does, and in just a minute and 40 seconds, he finds Julian Edelman for the touchdown to go back up 20-14 at halftime. The two teams trade touchdowns in the third quarter before a Stephen Gostkowski field goal early in the fourth gives New England a 30-21 lead with 14 minutes and 19 seconds to play. After a pair of punts, the Ravens still trail by 9 with 7 minutes and 29 seconds to go. With precious clock remaining, the ground game is now largely abandoned. The outcome is in Flacco's hands.
The team works in a lot of catch-and-run receptions to Rice, Smith, Pitta, and Jones to dink and dunk their way down to the New England 10. And then on 2nd and 10, Flacco takes a terrible 12-yard sack, potentially killing a desperately needed scoring opportunity. But a defensive holding call negates the loss, gives them 1st and goal at the 5, and sets Joe to connect with Torrey Smith once again on the very next play for his second touchdown of the game to make it 30-28 after the extra point. New England takes a touchback before getting across midfield, in part thanks to a questionable penalty against John Harbaugh. Coach Harbaugh seemingly stepped onto the field to call a timeout, but he's instead flagged by the replacement referees for unsportsmanlike conduct, extending the New England drive and inspiring the Baltimore crowd to audibly share their feelings with the national broadcast.
Still worked up over that last call, comes out there, who knows what he was doing. He's claiming he was trying to call a timeout. The official wasn't buying it. He's begging the official to come over and talk to him, and instead, he got a flag. He's saying, I'm trying to call timeout.
That's the loudest manure chant I've ever heard.
But ball don't lie. Running back Stevan Ridley is stuffed at the line of scrimmage. Brady is sacked on 2nd down, and the 3rd down pass attempt to tight end Rob Gronkowski falls incomplete. After Jacoby Jones saves his own ass on a muffed punt recovery, the Ravens have a chance for their own go-ahead 2-minute drill in this game. Flacco strikes quick, netting 44 yards on 3 passes in just about 30 seconds before a stuffed Ray Rice rushing attempt and an incomplete pass intended for Anquan Bolden bring up 3rd and 9. Joe goes for another deep shot to Jacoby Jones, and much as Torrey Smith often did, Jones fails to make the catch but gets the equally valuable defensive pass interference call. Now on the 7-yard line, the Ravens drain the clock down to allow Justin Tucker to try his first ever game winner. Tucker boots it over the goalpost, and the Ravens get perhaps a measure of retribution for some of the replacement officiating. Tucker's kick very nearly sails wide right as it travels over the goalpost, but the referee signals a score, and the now 2-1 Ravens beat the Patriots 31-30.
The replacement refs, who would continue to serve for pretty much one more day, on Monday Night Football the following evening, the crew committed a game-ending gaffe in which the Seahawks were gifted a win over the Packers when an interception was incorrectly called the touchdown reception for the offense. Within days of the public outcry, the two parties finally reached an agreement to resume regular officiating for Week 4. The Ravens' Week 4 opponent was their former selves, the Cleveland Browns, and despite a late push that made it interesting with 3 50-plus yard field goals by Cleveland kicker Phil Dawson, the Birds held on for a 23-16 win that saw them improve to now 3-1. This offense seemed to be firing on all cylinders in a completely new way. Sure, this was Joe's season low to this point in passing yards, but it was still 356. 187 in the following week's trip to Kansas City was definitely a steeper drop-off for Flacco, but 3 field goals from Tucker was still more than KC's 2 field goals by Ryan Suckup. The defense played as well as they had all season, and an ugly game with 6 total turnovers and nothing but field goals still ended with a 9-6 win for the now 4-1 Ravens.
The following week, the Ravens' 2012 tilts against the NFC East continued as this time the Dallas Cowboys traveled up to M&T Bank Stadium. Despite a 2-2 record, Dallas hung with Baltimore for the entire game, taking an early lead and even after falling behind, never letting the Ravens get too far out ahead. Near the beginning of the third quarter, Dallas got it back within 4 when Dan Bailey kicked a field goal for the first points of the second half to make it 17-13. And then came the ensuing Dan Bailey kickoff.
Jones going to bring it out deep from his own end zone, and look out! Jacoby Jones will take it the distance, 108 yards!
That was Jacoby Jones. The New Orleans native's name has come up a couple times as a receiver, but that's not what he's going to largely be known for. Jacoby actually became a bit of a Ravens legend last season when he helped them beat the Houston Texans in the divisional round. However, that's because he was still a member of the Texans when he twice muffed punts early in the game and failed to recover one of them that led to an early Ravens score and lead.
Despite having seen some drops up close, Baltimore nonetheless signed him in the offseason, ostensibly as a depth receiver, but with full acknowledgement from special teams coordinator Jerry Rosburg that he is here to compete for return duties primarily, going up against longtime defensive back and punt returner for the team Ladarius Webb and rookie wide receiver Deontay Thompson. Thompson had been taking the primary kickoff duties up to this point in the regular season, with Jones seeing more action on punts, but fumbled against Kansas City the week prior. So, for the first time all season and for the first time as a Raven, Jacoby got to field a kickoff. And you hear how much he made every one of those 108 NFL record-tying yards count. In his own words, you get that itch, and he wanted to scratch it. No team can win the Super Bowl without nailing a couple free agent role players, and it seemed for all the world that Baltimore had found the perfect guy for this role. All in all, he racked up 159 yards on 3 attempts in his first game. Unfortunately, the Cowboys were kicking off a lot instead of punting because the Ravens couldn't stop them from running the ball down their throats. Dallas rushed for 227 yards on the day, a record amount against the Baltimore Ravens, with 2 90-plus rushers in DeMarco Murray and Felix Jones. They gashed the defense from the jump, forcing Baltimore to make tackles in the open field again and again and again. And for anyone used to watching the Ravens defense, it's little surprise that Ray Lewis was once again leading both teams in tackles. After all, that's what he had been doing for virtually every game of the Ravens' existence so far.
If the late Art Modell was the last reminder of what the Ravens had been before, Ray Lewis was the promise of what the new franchise would come to be. While Ray Lewis was taken by the team in the very first round of their very first draft, he's actually their second ever draft pick because they also got to take Jonathan Ogden 4th overall before getting Ray at 26th, which does mean that they got 2 Hall of Famers just 22 picks apart. Over the next 16 years, Ray Lewis was quite simply put one of the 3 or 4 greatest linebackers of all time. In the first 16 years of the Ravens' existence, he played in 222 of 256 possible regular season games, only twice failing to start at least 12 in a season due to injury. During that time, he made 12 Pro Bowls, 7 All-Pro teams, and twice won Defensive Player of the Year while providing the beating emotional heart of what became one of the league's premier defensive units year in and year out. To see how dominant he was compared to other players, we can again look at our favorite all-around stat, approximate value. Entering the season, Lewis has 220 career AV, good for 10th all time. In fact, the only person that had been able to rack up more during Lewis's career was Ravens nemesis Peyton Manning. These were absurd AV totals for any defensive player, let alone a linebacker who, despite stuffing the stat sheet, was never going to lead the league in any categories like interceptions or sacks. His all-around game was good enough that he twice led the league in AV during 2 of the 3 seasons in which he posted at least 20. The other thing Lewis would occasionally lead the league in, at least early on, was tackles, and he has a gaggle of them today. Last season, he crossed the 2,000 mark for his career, and as Dallas continues to run behind their powerful offensive line, he just keeps racking them up today as Baltimore tries to hold on for the win late. After teammate Haloti Ngata gets Tony Romo with a sack for a 7-yard loss about halfway through the fourth quarter, the Cowboys settle for a field goal to pull within 1, making it 23-24 with 8:26 to play. The subsequent Ravens drive moves to midfield in spurts before Flacco connects with Anquan Boldin for 44 yards on a pair of passes to get them inside the 10-yard line, and then Vontae Leach and Ray Rice are happy to take it from there as a veritable basket of handoffs and dump-offs from Joe grow that lead back to 8 with a touchdown that makes it 31-23 Birds. When Dallas gets the ball back, the Ravens nearly force a turnover on downs, but Romo's able to find tight end Jason Witten for an 11-yard completion to stay alive, and then, on the next play, Ray Lewis makes a tackle on Philip Tanner after a 6-yard gain, his 14th tackle of the day. The next most for either team is Baltimore's Bernard Pollard with 13. No other player for Dallas or Baltimore has more than 8. Unfortunately, when he gets back to his feet, he holds his right arm, and anyone watching can immediately see that something is wrong. He exits the game and does not return as Dallas takes 22 plays over 4 minutes to score a touchdown that brings them within 2 before a failed 2-point conversion attempt. They don't, however, fail on the next play, an onside kick attempt that gives them the ball back at midfield with 30 seconds remaining. And on the first play from scrimmage, the gassed Ravens defense, now without their fearless leader, gives up what could have been a devastating 20-yard DPI penalty. Thankfully, Dan Bailey is unable to convert a last-second field goal attempt from 51 yards out, and the Ravens win to improve to 6-1. But all they can think about in the midst of the win is the incomparable loss that they have suffered. That tackle of Philip Tanner, career tackle 2,059 for Ray Lewis, is the last one he will ever record in a regular season. We may have just seen the end of Ray Lewis's time in the NFL.
Coming into this year, one of the biggest knocks against Flacco had been his lack of, quote, vocal leadership. But given the fact that Ray Lewis might be one of the most vocal leaders in football history, it's understandable that Joe would let the established veteran continue to set the tone for the team week in and week out. Well, now the defense has to figure out what it even is without Ray Lewis. Let's see how they do in Week 7 against last year's other playoff foes, the Houston Texans. Sure enough, they get out to a good start, taking a 3-0 lead on a Justin Tucker field goal on their first drive of the day. The teams trade field position for the next 6 minutes of the first quarter until Baltimore is eventually backed up against the goal line so much that Houston's Connor Barwin is able to sack Joe Flacco for a 2-point safety. And then the floodgates open. By the next time a Raven has the ball in the end zone, this time a 15-yard strike from Flacco to Tandon Doss, it only closed the margin to 19, as the Texans had scored an unanswered 29 points. And they answered right back with yet another touchdown to get the margin back to 26, before eventually winning 43-13. The Ravens finished with 176 total yards on offense, which is abysmal. But the defense without Lewis is even worse, as they gave up a brutal, but still nice, 420 total yards to the Matt Schaub-led Texans offense. Houston controls the ball for nearly 40 minutes of game time as the Ravens defense simply has no answer for a team that has an all-pro back in Arian Foster. Not a whole lot else. Heading into the Week 8 bye, it's clear that Baltimore has some shit to figure out.
After a week off, the Ravens needed a get-right game, something without a whole lot of extraneous stuff surrounding it. No extra emotion or anything. Just a plain, uncomplicated game. What they got was a division matchup against the Browns in Cleveland for the first time since Modell's passing. No pressure. While the fans in the stadium probably didn't include the Browns fan that would in 2014 literally piss on Modell's grave, it's fair to say that his passing hadn't softened a lot of hearts on the shores of Lake Erie. The dog pound certainly wasn't happy when the Ravens offense rode Ray Rice and Bernard Pierce into the end zone on their first two drives to jump out to a 14-0 lead by the end of the first quarter. But they did probably start to enjoy Baltimore's performance sometime between the fourth or fifth of 7 consecutive punts from the Birds, not including a kneel down to end the first half. Meanwhile, the Browns were keeping their special teams unit busy as well. Their last 3 drives of the first half, while all netting at least 50 yards, all ended in Phil Dawson field goals. The defense sure was bending with Lewis, but at least they weren't breaking. They even got their first turnover since Ray went down when Kerr Williams early in the third picked off Brandon Weeden, but that ended in punt number 4 of 7 for the increasingly incapable offense. Meanwhile, Phil Dawson just kept chipping away, with a 4th field goal that quarter and then a 5th one that now gave them a 1-point lead, as Baltimore still had not managed to score a single time since those 2 opening possessions. That must have at least lit some kind of fire under their ass, as they promptly moved 81 yards down the field to score, with a successful 2-point conversion putting them up 22-15. The Browns turned the ball over on downs the next drive, Tucker responded with a field goal to make it 25-15, and during Cleveland's final gasp of life, the Ravens defense benefited from another one of those Hall of Famers, as Ed Reed grabbed their second pick of the day to ice the game. For anyone who was worried about what the Ravens would look like without number 52 patrolling the middle of the field, the initial results were less than promising.
Meanwhile, this game marked a second consecutive outing for the offense that was just downright bad. Flacco would cruise through the first month, averaging 317 passing yards a game, while totaling 7 touchdowns through the air and an 8th on the ground compared to just 3 interceptions. That average plummeted from weeks 5 through 9 to 180 yards per game, and the same number of interceptions was thrown during that time compared to 3 total touchdowns. And as Joe went, so too went the team. After averaging just over 30 points a game in that first month, it had dropped a full 10 in the subsequent 4 games. And that's not taking into account the percentage of those points coming off either field goals or return touchdowns thanks to Jacoby Jones. For a season that was supposed to be the culmination of the progress Flacco and Cameron and the roster as a whole had made under Harbaugh, they were starting to run out of space on the runway for takeoff. In Baltimore the next week, with the team hosting the Oakland Raiders, Jones again accounted for some non-offensive scoring as he responded to a late Raiders field goal with a 105-yard kickoff return touchdown. Previously, only teammate Ed Reed had 2 career returns of at least 105 yards for a touchdown in league history. Jacoby had just become the first ever to have 2 in a single season. The difference was that these were the final 7 points of a franchise record 55 the Ravens hung on Oakland that day. Everything was going right on this one. Flacco was hitting bombs to Torrey Smith, Dennis Pitta, and Anquan Bolden. He even used his mobility to rush in for the first touchdown of the day. Rice got another score on the ground. Tucker hit 2 field goals in addition to 7 made point afters, one coming after his fellow Wolfpack member, punter Sam Cook, ran a gorgeous fake for the only touchdown of his eventual 16-year career. It seemed as good of a time as any to make their 4th primetime appearance of the season, taking on the Steelers in Pittsburgh for Sunday Night Football.
At the time of recording this, Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin had never once had a losing season in Pittsburgh. He's had some very talented rosters during that time, as evidenced by his 2 Super Bowl appearances and 1 win. But as a rival fan, what's even more notable about Tomlin is how he manages to keep that streak alive despite having not very good or downright bad rosters at times throughout his career. The Steelers do not give football games away. To hear former NFL player Chris Long tell it, the Steelers are, quote, that guy that if you don't get him out of the house by 10 o'clock, the motherfucker is sleeping on your couch. AFC North games, when the weather gets colder, inevitably turn into rock fights. And Long went on in that interview to call Mike Tomlin, quote, the Floyd Mayweather of rock fights. The year before, the 2 teams finished with identical 12-4 records, but Baltimore won the division by sweeping the season series. Pittsburgh's offense was in a years-long dry spell for offensive skill players and missing injured starting quarterback Ben Roethlisberger, eventually finished 22nd on the season for points scored. But the 2011 number 1 ranked defense by points allowed only took the slightest of steps back to number 6 overall. Flacco, all these years after his own attempt at stardom in Pittsburgh, had a 2-2 regular season record at Heinz Field coming into the match, with a chance to go over 500 there for the first time in his career. But the steel curtain certainly wasn't going to make it easy. Pittsburgh drew first blood when the Ravens defense gave up a painful deep defensive pass interference penalty to give the Steelers 42 free yards. 2 plays later, backup quarterback Byron Leftwich took it 31 yards to the house to go up 7-0 after Deshaun Suizem point after. After Pittsburgh forced a punt on the next drive and got the ball back deep in their own territory, Ed Reed made his Hall of Fame presence known again with a fumble recovery off of Mike Wallace that set up a Justin Tucker field goal 4 plays later to make it 7-3. 3 punts later, we had our first Ravens lead, as who else but Jacoby Jones took the Pittsburgh punt 63 yards for a 10-7 Baltimore lead with 3:33 to go in the first quarter. This is when the rock fight starts. Both teams went nearly 25 minutes of game time before anyone scored again, 6:55 into the third quarter. That was a Justin Tucker field goal after the Birds stalled just outside of the red zone. But you always take the points in a slog like this, and it was now 13-7 Ravens. Pittsburgh came roaring right back the next drive, getting all the way to 1st and 10 from the Baltimore 12. An incomplete pass followed by an 8-yard rush brought up 3rd and 2 from the 4. But after another incompletion, they decided not to go for it on 4th and to also take the points, kicking their own field goal to make it 13-10. That is literally all of the scoring that would happen on this nationally televised primetime game. For the entire fourth quarter, a national audience watching this saw nothing but AFC North football at its best. An almost suicidal commitment to the run game, tons of sacks, and punt after punt after punt. The Ravens offense failed to score a single touchdown for the second time this season. If you were to ignore the blip against the Raiders, they had now averaged just 16 points across 5 of their last 6 games. And looking at it under a microscope, you would start to see how even that made the offense look better than it had actually been during that period. Was this really the team of destiny that was going to avenge the loss from last year and exorcise the demons that had so far plagued Harbaugh's tenure as coach? If fans were going to continue buying into that, they were going to need some kind of sign. They got it the very next week.
The Ravens did, after all, end up winning that ugly, ugly game against Pittsburgh and were now 8-2 as they traveled across the country to San Diego to play the 4-6 Chargers. A rock fight against the Steelers or Browns or Bengals is to be expected. Getting to a rock fight against the Phillip Rivers-led Chargers was certainly not the expectation at kickoff. But through 3.5 quarters, that's exactly what happened. This game's massive scoring drought was right at the beginning, as neither team managed to put up any points until about halfway through the second when Rivers finally connected with Malcolm Floyd for a 21-yard score after the teams hit 5 combined punts between the two of them. While the Chargers fed off this momentum a little and managed a field goal on their next drive to take a 10-0 lead, Baltimore just kept punting. Every single drive in the first half ended with a punt for Baltimore, but they at least got on the board to start the third quarter. After Torrey Smith turned a little Flacco dump-off into a 54-yard gain, Tucker's first field goal of the day made it a 10-3 San Diego lead. Later on in the quarter, that was still the score, and the Ravens picked up a first down at the San Diego 23. But after Ray Rice picked up 9 yards in the first 2 downs, both Flacco and Bernard Pierce were stuffed to turn the ball over after a failed 4th down conversion. San Diego then flipped the field while eating up more than 7 minutes of clock to push the lead back to 10 with another field goal.
For whatever reason, this was finally the urgency that Harbaugh and Cam Cameron needed to put the fate of the game in their franchise quarterback's hands. In just 3.5 minutes, Jacoby Jones caught 3 passes for 42 yards. Torrey Smith snagged 3 for 40 yards, and Dennis Pitta grabbed the final 4-yard pass to score and make it a 13-10 game. The defense marched onto the field and sent Rivers right back off with a 3-and-out. And after a nice little Jacoby punt return, Joe got the ball back with 3:09 to go at the Baltimore 40. Dennis Pitta quickly got them across midfield with a 16-yard catch, but then a hellacious sequence seemed to put the game and maybe even the season out of reach. First, All-Pro guard Marshall Yanda got an offsides call that made it 1st and 20 at the Baltimore 36. Then, a pair of incompletions brought up 3rd and 20, at which point Flacco took a terrible sack from Antoine Barnes. He even fumbled the ball going down, somehow miraculously recovering it, but the damage was done, and Baltimore lined up for 4th and 29 from their own 37.
It's tough to assign a probability to something like this, but we can do our best to try. With play-by-play data from Sports Reference going back to 1994, we know that to this point, there have been 1,161 instances of a team facing 4th and 25 or longer. The number of times that a team converted on that without a penalty, giving them the automatic first down, without some kind of muffed punt, turnover, freakish accident play, the number of times that they simply put up the number of yards they needed to make that conversion was 9. Less than 1% of the time. Flacco takes the snap and immediately has nothing available to him. The pocket is quickly collapsing, and the only option he can even think of is a dump off to Ray Rice, charitably at the line of scrimmage. There's maybe 10 uninterrupted yards of open space before the defender trailing him converges with 3 other Chargers awaiting him with open arms. With a timely cut to the left, all 3 of those oncoming defenders take one another out, and suddenly, Rice has a path to the outside that just might get him across. Turning back towards the first down line, he tucks and runs with another defender coming out of him when all of a sudden that defender is blindsided, knocked on his ass by a vicious Anquan Boldin block. The defenders knock into Rice finally, but he's able to shake it off with just enough space to dive between the last 2 Chargers trying to tackle him as they bring him down. And somehow, some way, he has the wherewithal to extend the ball just a little bit further as he goes down.
For Flacco, 1:59 to go. This is your ball game for Baltimore. Flacco in the pocket. Dump off. Rice has some room, but can he really get to that first down line? Rice stays on his feet. Oh, Ray Rice! Incredible!
After the officials' review, by less than a yard, Rice is ruled to have reached the target. First down, Baltimore.
The Ravens go on to win the game 16-13 off another Tucker field goal. But do silly things like wins and losses matter all that much when you've just witnessed divine intervention on the football field? The offense had been, frankly, god-awful for much of the day. Flacco's final line of 355 yards on 30 of 51 passing looked solid, but his 2 longest passes of the day were checkdowns to Torrey Smith and Ray Rice that went for a combined 84 yards, nearly a quarter of Joe's entire production that day.
And in the end, it seemingly hadn't mattered. When push came to shove, Baltimore this time caught the breaks it needed in the most dramatic fashion possible, and they managed to pick up their 9th win of the season. Coming back to Baltimore, this is when fans started to get excited. The team had won a franchise record 15 straight home games at this point, dating back to their last loss on December 5th, 2010, a 13-10 squeaker to the Steelers. And there couldn't be a more perfect situation to try and now stretch it to a full 16. None other than Pittsburgh was coming to town with now their 3rd-string quarterback at the helm, Charlie Batch. But it was too perfect to imagine that the streak would continue in such a fashion. Despite a 13-point flurry in the second quarter for Baltimore, it became clear as the game went on that they were in for another rock fight, and ultimately, the offense couldn't score enough yet again, while the defense failed to hold on to a late lead. Baltimore lost 23-20 to split the season series with their arch rivals.
One of the best things about college football is how intermingled fan bases are within local populations. When state loses to Tech, your neighbors and friends and coworkers are going to let you hear about it. Because of the geographic spread of Steelers Nation often crossing the Mason-Dixon line into Maryland, losses to their ilk hurt just a little bit extra for Birds fans who have to deal with Steelers fans on a regular basis in their day-to-day lives. But however annoying that is, there's exactly one team that Baltimore would want to lose to even less than this with the proximity in mind. The following week, the now 9-3 Ravens traveled to the shittiest stadium in modern football, FedEx Field, to take on their DMV rivals, the Washington football team. Washington, a perennial laughingstock, was having arguably the only season in modern history where they weren't a complete laughingstock or disgrace, and that was all thanks to rookie phenom Robert Griffin III. RG3 and fellow rookie Alfred Morris, who would this season set the record for combined rushing yards by rookie quarterback-halfback tandem, gashed the Ravens all day with 167 total rushing yards to go with Griffin's 242 passing yards. Unfortunately, this game was the beginning of what would become an incredibly dumb quarterback controversy.
Right after the 2-minute warning in the fourth quarter, Haloti Ngata gets a solo tackle on RG3. Solo, that is, except for the help from the god-awful FedEx Field turf, which absolutely massacres RG3's leg as he goes down, knocking him out for the rest of the game and altering the entire trajectory of his career. He splits the rest of the game with backup Kirk Cousins, who manages to force overtime on that drive with a 2-point conversion before Washington goes on to win 31-28 on an overtime field goal. Flacco was good in this game for the Ravens. Some losses can be laid at his feet this season, and 182 yards on 16 of 21 passing isn't sexy, but 3 touchdowns and a 121.4 passer rating is. No, if there's any takeaway from this game, it's the fleeting nature of a quarterback's career. RG3 could have been, frankly should have been, a generational player after his college career at Baylor. He'd win nearly every Rookie of the Year award a couple months later and make the Pro Bowl his first season, but he would never come close to equaling those heights again. And after almost single-handedly re-energizing the organization and fan base, he would only ever take 5 playoff snaps for the team before they moved on from him. You need to find the franchise quarterback to be successful. We spent hours driving home that point so far. But this was a giant flashing sign in front of John Harbaugh's face saying, "You do not know how long this will last. You may lose your quarterback at any moment. Tomorrow is not guaranteed." Maybe that's why, 12 hours later, John Harbaugh called his longtime friend Cam Cameron into his Owings Mills office and fired him.
The next morning, Harbaugh held his usual Monday press conference where he announced the firing of Cam Cameron, the only offensive coordinator he and Flacco had ever known during their time in Baltimore. In the same breath, he also shared who would be replacing him. Former Indianapolis head coach, who this season had been hired as the Ravens quarterback coach just 13 days after getting canned in Indy, Jim Caldwell. And his first test as the offensive coordinator, figuring out how to get Joe Flacco to outscore the last quarterback he coached, Peyton Manning. Caldwell had been in Indianapolis for over a decade. He had served as Tony Dungy's quarterbacks coach with the Buccaneers before following Dungy after his firing to his new gig in Indy in 2002. From 2002 to 2008, Caldwell's quarterback for every single game was Peyton Manning at the absolute peak of his powers. Manning was a Pro Bowler before he started working with Caldwell, sure, but then he became a perennial first-team All-Pro and 2-time MVP. This was likely no small factor in Dungy announcing Caldwell as his hand-picked successor to take over after the 2008 season, which he did almost 1 year later to the day. Unlike many rookie head coaches brought in to fix an ailing organization, because Dungy was leaving voluntarily, Caldwell got to jump right into the continuing peak of Peyton Manning. Manning had just won a 3rd MVP in 2009, and by the end of the 2010 season, he had started every single one of the possible 144 regular season games, plus 17 playoff games since Jim Caldwell came to town. And all things considered, the relationship was pretty fruitful.
You remember Ron Jaworski, Flacco's fellow New Jerseyan turned NFL Bird quarterback. There's an anecdote he shared in a book he wrote called The Games That Changed the Game that's frequently referenced when talking about this period of Indianapolis football. As the story goes, Jaws and John Gruden are filming some pre-taped segments with Indy for Monday Night Football, and they remark to offensive coordinator Tom Moore their surprise in seeing Manning take virtually every rep rather than spreading some to his backups. Supposedly, Moore says, "Fellas, if 18 goes down, we're fucked, and we don't practice fucked." Well, last year, Jim Caldwell was fucked. During the offseason, Manning had a neck surgery. And then after his rehab failed to produce results and in fact left him reportedly incapable of throwing a football, he had a second neck surgery. All the while, he missed his first ever games and eventually full season since joining Indianapolis. And boy, did they miss him. After only managing 2 wins, a drop-off of 8 from the previous season, Caldwell was canned. Maybe it's an ill omen that despite the correlation of Manning's best seasons being with Caldwell as a coach, he couldn't coax the best performance out of Manning's backups that year. Or maybe someone who turned Peyton Manning into a capital E elite player that he is can do a similar job with the still mostly unshapen clay of Joe Flacco. If Caldwell is supposedly the object of blame for Indianapolis last year, does he get any credit for the previous success? It'll be a lot easier argument to make if he can replicate some of that success here.
So, the torch has been passed. Cam Cameron is gone. Jim Caldwell is the key that John Harbaugh finally believes can unlock the version of Joe Flacco that this flawed but still 9-4 division-leading Ravens team needs if they're going to have any chance of getting back to the AFC Championship game, let alone any further than that. With just 1 week to get ready, it's time for them to prepare to face off against the Denver Broncos and their quarterback, Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, while he's with Jim Caldwell, played the Baltimore Ravens 8 times, including 2 postseason meetings. He did not lose a single one of those games. Now, Peyton Manning owned just about everybody in the regular season during that period, but in the same 9-year stretch, the Ravens had a top 10 defense in yards allowed 8 times and a top 5 one 5 times. If any team was going to present some kind of resistance to him, you'd think they would have as good a chance as any. And in the first Manning-Ravens tilt since the end of his partnership with Caldwell, the result on the field seemed to indicate who should take the lion's share of credit for that success.
Up 3-0 at the start of the second quarter, Manning nearly gets his first touchdown of the day on an Eric Decker pass that after review was stopped right at the goal line. But no Sean Moreno takes care of business to make it 10-0 as the teams settle into a stalemate until right before halftime. Flacco has a chance to narrow the gap at the 2-yard line, but instead he throws a touchdown for the Broncos, as Chris Harris picks him off and runs back 98 yards for the score. After the half, Baltimore finally gets a field goal, but then Manning finds Decker again to burn the secondary for a 51-yard dagger. Moreno adds another one, and by the time Caldwell can finally coordinate Joe to a couple of long touchdowns to Dennis Pitta, it's ultimately a futile effort, as the Ravens drop their 3rd straight, losing by a final score of 34-17. This is it? This was our last chance at making the past 5 years mean something? Anything? This was it? God, it's so fucking over. One week later, and baby, we are back! Baltimore plays host to the New York Football Giants, and after forcing a 3-and-out on New York's opening drive, Flacco, along with running backs Rice and Pierce, marched down the field to cap a 73-yard drive with a 6-yard touchdown to Torrey Smith, putting the Birds up 7-0. When they get the ball back, Flacco stretches Smith out a little bit more this time, drops a 43-yard bomb on the Giants' secondary to land on the doorstep of the end zone, and after Ray Rice can't punch it in on first down, Joe decides he'll take it himself, making it 14-0 after the extra point. New York gets one back in the second quarter. With 3:15 till halftime, Joe kicks the drive off with his 3rd deep ball of 20 yards or more on the day, skipping right to midfield via the hands of Torrey Smith once again. After a couple short rushes and Anquan Bolden completions, a check down to Rice on 2nd down goes for 27 yards, 2 yards short of the total for that miraculous 4th down conversion, but only because the end zone was only 27 yards away.
Jim Caldwell is orchestrating one hell of an offense in only his 2nd ever game with play calling duties. All those years in Indy, he certainly had influence over the playbook, sure, but until the previous week, Jim Caldwell hadn't actually called plays since coaching at Wake Forest at the turn of the millennium. As for his offensive philosophy for play calling,
score as many points as you can, as often as you can.
Roger that, coach. What's more, he's not even on the sidelines to do it. The neophyte coordinator is operating from the booth, which is certainly not unheard of given the bird's eye view it provides someone in charge of telling 11 guys how to score against 11 other guys. But it's still at least a little surprising given that this requires all plays to be relayed from him to receivers coach Jim Hostler on the sidelines, who then relays the plays to Joe Flacco on the field. That's a lot of work to get the plays that Caldwell is calling for, once again, only the 2nd time in his NFL career. This shouldn't be working, but through 30 minutes today, it is. It's 24-7 at the half, but it'll be 33-7 after a pair of punts to start the third are followed by a nearly 8-minute long drive that culminates in the first of 3 unanswered field goals in consecutive drives by the Ravens. The final score of 33-14 is even closer than the game seemed thanks to a garbage time touchdown by Eli Manning.
This was Joe's 2nd week against a member of the Manning family, and if Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were truly in this tier of their own, the tier right below was the best hope for guys like Flacco or Eli Manning. And as Eli Manning had shown, that was plenty good enough. You could just be a good quarterback playing with a dominant defense on the other side of the ball as long as you could step your game up when it counted. Eli Manning's 2 Super Bowl rings were the one counter-argument that the sport had to the shadow that was cast by Eli's brother and his 2-time Super Bowl victim, Tom Brady. See, they're not gods. They bleed the same as the rest of us. And if Eli Manning can draw blood, surely Joe Flacco could. If a 2-time champion who spelled his name E-L-I wasn't E-L-I-T-E, then who was? And if the guy that just dunked on him isn't also, then what are we even doing here? With that win, the Ravens clinched the AFC North thanks to their divisional record, and accordingly clinched a home playoff game in the wildcard round. They still had to travel to Cincinnati the following week, but both the Ravens and Bengals know that this would not be a full 60 minutes of the first stringers going against one another. The starters did suit up for the game, playing 2 whole drives in the first quarter before a sack on Flacco that ended the second one, perhaps hastened Harbaugh's hand a little bit in yanking them to rest up for what was to come in the weeks ahead. Joe Flacco had to prepare for the next game. It was time to turn the calendar once again to January. Elite is a production of Remember That Guy. Written, researched, and recorded by James Lentzweiler, Justin Diaz, and Xavier Perez. All music is provided by RTG's musical director Don Ham, and sources for additional audio and all of our research can be found in the episode descriptions. More information on Elite and all things RTG related can be found at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing it. Word of mouth is our best, and only, sponsor. Until next time, thanks for listening.